having grown up around Christianity and, my mother being a CCD teacher when we were in Catholicism, learning the Bible and these stories, it's really fascinating for me to hear quotes from the Bible and then in Course in Miracles and Helen's original notes to have Jesus go a little bit further into it or give a different perspective on it, like a metaphysical perspective, which I'm not a Bible scholar. And, you know, I've through places like Unity Church and different teachings around the Bible's teachings and a metaphysical perspective of it, it gives a lens into a whole other way of seeing it. And I want to read to you something from this version of the Course of Miracles. This is the complete and annotated edition from Circle of Atonement, and they put Bible quotes at the bottom. Now I'm going to read a few paragraphs of this. I just think it's such a fascinating read, and I'll also read the referring Bible quotes to it. And it says, miracles are associated with fear only because of the fallacy that darkness can hide. So what Jesus says in the beginning, we associate listening to the Holy Spirit, expressing love in the world. We associate it with fear because we feel like we're giving up all the voices of the ego that we've given so much authority over to and so much value to. He says, people believe that what they cannot see does not exist, and their physical eyes cannot see in the dark. This is a very primitive solution and has led to a denial of the spiritual eye, which always depends on light. So think about that for a moment. Jesus says, people believe that what they cannot see does not exist. Think about, how many of us, it's like if I can't tangibly see it, it doesn't exist. So something like tuning into the Holy Spirit doesn't make sense to the physical eyes or the physical intellect. He says, and their physical eyes cannot see in the dark. So if we're in the quote dark here in this realm, our physical eyes cannot see actually the light and can't see in the dark. So we're set up with this very interesting situation where we will only believe it if we see it, and yet only what our physical eyes see. They cannot see eternity or God. So he goes on, he says, however, remember the biblical statement, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. And this is from Proverbs 15:3. So from the Bible, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. There are two stages, one lower and one higher, Jesus continues on and says, which are involved in the escape from darkness. Now, this part made it into this version of A Course in Miracles. He goes on, he says, the first is the recognition that darkness cannot hide, and cannot is italicized. This usually does entail fear. The second, now it does entail fear. Let's go over that for a moment. The darkness cannot hide. It that's well, for us that generates fear because we want to hide the dark. We want to push it under the rug. We want to bury it deep within ourselves like it's not there, or what we see in the world turn away from it. Now, he goes on, he says, the first is the recognition that darkness cannot hide. This usually does entail fear. The second is that there's nothing you want to hide. Want is italicized. Even if you could, this brings escape from fear. He goes on, he says, as soon as you've completely entered the second phase, you will not be only willing to enter into communion, but will also understand peace and joy. Your commitment, he was saying to Helen, is not yet total. This is why you still have more to learn than to teach. When your equilibrium stabilizes, you can teach as much as you learn. And actually, that's a very key part of A Course in Miracles, is that we're always teaching, and what we're teaching is teaching us. So what Jesus was saying to Helen is that when she stabilizes, you could teach as much as you learn. This will give you the proper sense of balance. Meanwhile, remember that no effort is wasted. No effort is wasted. This also makes sense uh, because Helen was super resistant, especially in the beginning. Now, this was in the beginning as well, that this was channeled. Now, they reference here, no effort is wasted. This may be a reference to a well-known line from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a spiritual text from India. No effort is wasted, and no gain is ever lost when on this path. Even a little practice will shelter you from sorrow and protect you from the greatest fear. And the Circle of Atonement put in, we say this because of the emphasis Jesus places upon no effort is wasted, the injunction to remember, as if saying it's already known. So to remember is to be a member again. that we already know all of this deep within ourselves. Okay, let's go on. He says, unless you remember this, you cannot avail yourself of my efforts, which are limitless. So we have to remember that no effort's wasted. We have to remember as we stabilize more in the communion, we'll teach as much as we learn. It'll happen simultaneously. And he goes on and says the biblical teaching. Now this is really fascinating, and this comes from Matthew and also from Mark. He says the biblical teaching that if you are ashamed of me before men, I will be ashamed of you before God is interpreted as a threat only as long as you remain at the first stage in that darkness cannot hide. So think about what Jesus is saying here. He's referring to that darkness cannot hide. And he goes on, he says, let me repeat that. The biblical teaching that if you are ashamed of me before men, I will be ashamed of you before God is interpreted as a threat only, and that's underlined in Helen's notes, as long as you remain at the first stage. What it really, and he underlines really, what it really means is that if you are ashamed of me, and Jesus put in parentheses, or embarrassed by love, you will project and therefore make it impossible for me to reach you. Make every effort you can not to do this. And not is underlined. I will help you as much as you will let me. Now let me read the biblical part. In Mark, it says, whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And from Matthew 10:33, it says, but whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. So Jesus is giving us a metaphysical way of seeing this, that's saying when we are ashamed of Jesus, we're really ashamed of love. We're really ashamed of truth and reality, and that his voice cannot reach us. So if you think of it metaphysically, you won't be able to connect with God. We won't be able to be connected to the Holy Spirit and have Jesus as an older brother, if you will, support us on our journey. Because what he's saying is that if you're ashamed of me or embarrassed by love, you will project that embarrassment, that fear, that anger, that resistance. You will project it and therefore make it impossible for me to reach you, Jesus says. Make every effort you can not to do this. I will help you as much as you will let me. And then really, ultimately, what it comes down to is really living Jesus' teaching and not ever being ashamed of that to the world, which would make us deny Jesus, the Holy Spirit. And then that'll ultimately impact us because the more that we do that, the more Jesus cannot reach us, the more we're disconnected from the Holy Spirit. And he says, make every effort you can not to do this. So to each day for us to live in that direct communion and really ultimately be the only thing that we want. When we do that, our life absolutely transforms and we're no longer afraid of love. Because what Jesus says is deep down, we're afraid of love. We're afraid of healing. We're ultimately afraid of God.